Welcome back to Tactics, everybody. So we're gonna finally be wrapping up session one, going over the first tactic that we learned. What is the first tactic that we learned? Anyone remember? Actually, the only one that was here was Katie. What's the first tactic? Columbo number one. And what do you mean by that? Okay, that's the first question you want to ask people that challenge your spiritual conviction. 2 weeks ago, I might have mentioned it, but we really drilled it last week. So you might not. That's my fault, right? I can take responsibility there for that. So we're gonna briefly kind of wrap up, session one, which is kind of focusing on that first Columbo question, which is what do you mean by that? And really the way that functions in our spiritual discussions is if someone gives us a challenge saying, Christians are a bunch of science deniers, right? We want them to define that for us. What do you mean by that? When you say I'm a science denier, what do you mean by science? What element of science are you referring to that makes me deny science? There's a lot of science that I accept. I accept that gravity exists. I accept that a lot of pretty much any scientific fact is true, right? That's actually been brought to that level of evidence. But there might be certain things that you're thinking of that might be scientific theories that haven't been proven. So you want them to define why exactly they're labeling you like that, right? Helps you to know their view. And kind of the function of that is to make it so that you're not building up what's called a straw man argument. Anyone know what a straw man argument is? So, Kelly, what's a straw man argument?
It just means that you kind of project what you think that person is saying, and it could be completely not what they're saying.
That's perfect. Right. Very easy to blow over, like a straw man, right? Because it's this fabrication of what you think their view is, and you might have a really good argument against that view, and then you find out that they don't believe that at all, and they just come out, that's not my view, and then you just wasted a whole lot of time and energy, right? So you want to find out what their view is. You want to, what's called steel man that argument. You want it to be so tough that you really have to have a rock-solid argument to blow it over. And that's really what we're trying to do here in this class. So, and what do you mean by that helps you to uncover what that view is so that you get that steel man, and that it's not something that you're assuming to be their view, right? And so what we're going to do is we're all, good. And so everyone's kind of got their buddy here. So we're all going to pair up. So everyone's going to get a friend. So it can be your spouse. Not saying we have to mix things up. And what we're going to do is you're going to come up with 3 challenges to the Christian worldview, and whatever it might be, preferably something that you might have actually encountered in your life, something that someone said to you and didn't really know how to respond to at one time. See if you can get 3 of them, and then someone's going to play the role of defender, and someone's going to play the role of challenger, and so the challenger's just going to say the challenge one of the challenges that they came up with, and the defender is just going to use Columbo number 1. What do you mean by that? And what you're going to try to do is you're going to try to tailor it to their challenge. And so, in the example that I gave earlier, if someone comes at you saying that Christians are a bunch of science deniers, don't just ask, what do you mean by that? You can do that. But try to tailor it to their challenge. What do you mean by science? What do you mean by denier? What do you mean by science denier? So tailor it to their question. Try to see if you can use that Columbo number 1 question to do that. So, and we might need a group of, actually, I'll pair up with you, Kate, or if someone else wants to. We're doing an interactive. Do you want to do a group of 3?
We could do
All right.
That's fine.
Very good. All right. So everyone, anyone unclear on the interactive study? If you need help, I'm here. If you need help, I have some questions too. So if someone's having trouble coming up with a question, I can give you one of mine. But why don't we all pair up and try to come up with 3 challenges to the Christian faith that someone might come up with that we're going to want to use Columbo number 1 with. What do you mean by that?
For example, he used the example of Christians are science deniers. And so then their response would be, well, what do you mean by science? Or what you could also say probably, what part of science do you think Christians are denying? That is the Columbo question. Is that a reference to the show?
Yes. Yeah, we had to watch some clips of it because we're we've never seen
My dad used to watch Columbo, so I do know somewhat.
Wait, what show?
Her dad's Columbo.
Yeah.
It was a reference to the show.
Yep. I had to get a sample of it. I'm like, if I'm going to refer to this guy over and over again in this class. Yeah.
Okay, so It was more of a comment, not a question. So, have fun with it, I'm not sure. But her comment was, why would I want to believe in someone who is constantly trying to check me to make sure I'm not doing anything wrong? So I guess what would be the because I was stumped. This was years ago. Paul and I were just dating. So I was stumped when she said that to me. Why would I believe in a God or someone that is constantly checking on me to see when I make a mistake?
Like what do you mean by
Mistake, yeah, that's right.
Or something
Yeah, that would
like
probably
that.
be the Columbo question.
Because I would maybe want to try and get it eventually to like against, I know a lot of people say that they're with moral relativism.
Right,
And
yes,
I think
right.
I'm pointing out like how
Yes.
silly moral relativism is. So I think it'd be like, well, what do you mean by this?
Mistake, yeah, I guess so.
Maybe.
Yes,
So,
yes.
yeah.
Right. Right, not so much. We do anyway.
Yeah.
Right, exactly, and that was actually what came into my mind in that instance, we're gonna do that anyway.
Yeah.
I'm sure you can do that.
Regardless of
If you say it's not, you are, and then the question is like, where is that coming from?
Right, yeah,
She actually did that when we were in the car, Paul was not in the car.
she definitely waited for that.
You know, at the time, he didn't really know. And he was a new Christian then, but he like immediately went into apologetics, so he probably would have started arguing with her. Probably wouldn't have been the right thing anyway, and God would have straightened that out. Anyway, go ahead, you guys think of the question. Have you ever had a question posed to you, or have you heard one?
That's
So I guess that would be, what do you mean by evil?
Yeah.
What do you define as evil? Right? Yeah. Or, and actually, and I think it would be like, what do you feel God's role should be? Or then start the discussion.
And then I think that has to like get into eventually
Absolutely,
like
yes.
like getting an original question.
Yes. Yeah. What do you mean by evil? What do you, yeah.
Or what, yeah.
Because usually I think those people, and then it's a straw man argument, I'm sure, we're not actually talking to that person, but usually they're thinking of evil as in like wars and atrocities against children and things like that, and most of those people don't equate, lying to your child without Santa Claus. And it's lying, it's sin, and they don't see that as a sin. They see these horrific things, and that's what we're talking about. Why is it not preventing all that? So it's, I think, probably good to have them define.
Right.
What do you mean by evil? What are the things that you're thinking of? Because there are things
Right.
that they're thinking of. It could actually be stuff that happened to them.
Sure.
That
Like they might
is-
have something.
I'm sure.
Right, yeah.
Exactly. And it doesn't mean that that's not a valid trauma that they can hear, but, you do have to start with that.
Yeah, like figure out where that
Yes,
comes from.
yeah, like what is it that they're talking about? Or are they just constantly on social media?
Yeah.
Because that would be constantly on social media, and you're seeing what one group of people's opinions are on everyone. I guess it's your turn. Have you ever had a person talk to you?
All right.
Yeah, I think that's
So begin wrapping up the conversation.
I don't know exactly the question, but some like that. Like I just Yeah, like happy.
All right. Are we ready to share with the class?
Yeah,
Good?
That's a tough one.
All right. So, what's that? Yeah, no, it's good fun. We'll see what we came up with. I have a few too, so we'll see what happens. So, all right, ladies. So, it seems like we came up with some good conversation. I think we have some good ones, huh? Seems like you guys got into it. All right, so let's start with Dale and Lisa. So what? And you didn't have to come up with 3 necessarily, but what was one of the ones that you came up with?
The one that we drilled down on was, why does God let bad things happen to good people? And the question was, can you give me an example? Which is, I think, an extension of what do you mean by that?
Yeah.
I personally, I couldn't help, this is a little bit down a rabbit hole, but I always liked Columbo when he said, and just one more thing.
Yeah, I think I actually brought up that exact question, that like caricature of him last week, or that characterization. Yep.
That's what.
So I think you could, like, another way of phrasing that would be like, what do you mean by bad things, right? That would be, if you're going to phrase it in the way that that the book phrases it. But you could say, can I have an example of that? And I think that does achieve the same thing. Cool. Yeah, and so what I want you guys, all we're trying to do here is gather information. Like when we're asking this, we're not trying to jump ahead by trying to argue with this person yet. All we're doing is gathering information, so there's no pressure right now. So let's see what the ladies come up with.
I can share mine because it is my sister-in-law asked me this question, so Paul's sister. Actually.
Okay.
We were alone in a car. Paul and I were just dating, so didn't know her too well yet, but we were in the car talking about God. And she said, well, why would I want to believe in someone that's constantly checking me to make sure I'm not making a mistake?
Okay.
So that's a tough one.
That's an interesting one, yeah.
I was young, I was like 19, so
right.
I was like, how do I answer that? So what's the Columbo question for that? I think.
So yeah, what did you guys come up with?
Well, you said it's moral relativism at some point.
Like what do you mean by like I think I think I sort of said what do you mean by what I did wrong? Like sort of what do you mean by wrong? And then I think
so phrase the question again for me.
Why would I want to believe in someone that's constantly
checking on me
to see when I
make a mistake?
Constantly.
There's a couple phrases in there that I think you could pick apart. Mistake is one. What's a mistake?
What do you mean by mistake? And people say what do you mean by checking in?
Yeah. Right. Yeah, I think that would be the other one. So that's cool. Yeah, I think that works. Good. So you gathered useful information on checking in and mistakes. They're kind of like, yeah, those are words, very ambiguous, those words, very wiggly. Yeah, that might have stumped, I'm sure that would have stumped me at the time too, especially at 19.
She's 5 years younger than me.
Is she really?
Yeah.
She would have been, young, like 14 or something at that time. Wow, okay. Kennedy's.
We talked about the pro-life.
Okay, that's a good one. That's one that'll come up probably frequently. So what was the challenge?
How do you define life?
So that would be your response?
And what gives it value?
Right. So I guess the challenge itself would have been something like, how can you be against, the pro-choice movement or something like that? And then you kind of rephrased it to, what is life? Or, you kind of...
How do you define it? Where does it start?
Yep.
What makes you think that?
Good. Yeah, that's a good one. That one, I feel like that because of how thinly veiled that argument is, it's one of the easier ones to really ask, what do you mean by that? And our Columbo number 2 question, which we're going to get into hopefully by the end of the class. We have another 20 minutes or so to get to it. Cool, that was good. And Horst, what'd you come up with?
We basically talked about the same Dale and Lisa, why bad things happen to good people.
Okay.
That's a common one.
Yes, that's a very common one. And what was your, what do you mean by that type of question?
Yeah. Well, what do you mean by bad things?
Bad things. Okay. So similar to...
What do you mean by good people?
Isn't that also a good question, right? Yes. Wow, that was good. Yeah, there's two sides to that question. Okay, very good. So I think you guys did really good. Yeah, I think I had similar ones. I think what's his name? Richard Dawkins is famous for saying the Christian God is a sadistic, maniacal, vengeful God, right? It kind of begs the question. Well, okay, what do you mean by sadistic, right? Because when I think of sadistic, I think of just unnecessary punishment. There's no basis for it, and maybe that's their concept of what God is. That he's not punishing us for any reason. It's just because he hates us, right? Is that biblical? And then you can kind of continue that conversation from there. But we won't belabor that too much. Just figured I'd share one of mine as well. So let's do a quick self-assessment. I think these are good just because not everyone can come to every class. So this is just like just kind of hitting like 5 key points of the first session of tactics. So the first one, let's see what people remember. Before there can be any blank, there must be a season of blank. Anyone remember that one? That would have been from class number 1. So I think a lot of us were here for that. It's all right if you don't remember.
We're going to be part of this, there must be a season of gardening.
Yes, that's right. And what's that referring to?
Like planting the seed for someone versus like when someone actually finally comes to Jesus.
Yes.
Because it takes, I think there's a certain, isn't it 7 years or something,
7 years.
on average before someone?
Right, statistically, yeah, it's like 7 years before someone first hears the gospel to actually, for that to come to fruition and them accepting Christ. So yeah, they could be at any place within that 7-year period, and it might not be 7 years. I mean, that's just a statistic, but yeah.
It's usually not the first time they hear it.
Right. So yeah, before there can be any harvest, there must be a season. This even goes for our kids, right? That accept Christ at 12, 13 years old. How much Sunday school had they been to before they actually made that commitment? A lot of times we don't think that there was much of a gardening period for them because they were so young. But all of that work that you put into them when they were 3, 4, 5, 10 years old, it's finally coming to fruition, but when they're at that age of accountability and they can make that decision for themselves. So there's always a period of gardening that precedes their salvation. So second one is tactics are meant to exploit another's blank in order to guide him to the blank. Anyone remember this one? There might be a couple ways you can phrase this too, so don't feel like this is like set in stone.
I wasn't here for that one, but is it error?
So
Guide him to the truth.
yes, that's pretty much the gist of it. Yeah, exploit another's. I think the way that they word it in the book was bad thinking, but erroneous thinking you could phrase it that way too. So yeah, that's kind of the function of tactics, right? We want to kind of know where the flaws are in their thinking. That has its roots in, well, why? We have the truth, right? We know this is true, that Jesus is the way, the truth, and the life. And so anytime that someone expresses something to the contrary, where they're saying that atheism's true or polytheism or whatever, well, there's going to be a flaw somewhere because it doesn't align with reality, right? And so we can always look for those inconsistencies, and that's why we know that they're there somewhere. We just have to uncover them. What are tactics not meant to do? You remember that? Take a stab. Humiliate, right? So that's one. Also, this is kind of like a different way to phrase it, but they're also not meant to trick people. So it's not like we're trying to fool someone into believing a lie, right? I mean, that kind of goes against what I just said a couple seconds ago. We have the truth, right? And so, but sometimes people can see, it sounds like, we're just using these tactics so that we just get them to believe what we believe, right? No, the point is to get them to the truth. So they're not tricks, they're not clever ploys. In fact, if anything, we're trying to level the playing field, right? So a lot of times when people are driving these challenges at us, it puts us at a disadvantage because we're trying to prove our point over and over and over again when they should actually be proving their point too. If they make a claim like we're a bunch of science deniers, a lot of times that puts us in a position where we have to no, I'm not a science denier. We try to give them all the evidence as to why we're not a science denier. But they made the claim. So you want to push that back on them. You want to make them explain, well, what do you mean by science denier? And have them explain themselves before you then go in, full artillery mode. So, but, okay, so the key to the Columbo tactic is using carefully selected blank to productively blank the conversation. Brent and Aubrey, I'm going to quiz you on that one. Any ideas?
I would say carefully selected questions to productively sway the conversation.
Pretty much, yeah. There's probably a number of ways you could word that, but the key one was questions, which you Got it, right? So the key to the Columbo tactic is using carefully selected questions to productively sway. I think sway is like another way of saying guide, right? So you're trying to guide the conversation or advance the conversation. There's like a number of words you could probably put in that one. So perfect. And then the last one is what we did today. The first step of Columbo is to gather blank and employ some form of the question blank. Dale and Lisa, what's that?
Gather information
Yep.
and employ some form of the question. What do you mean by that?
Perfect. Great. All right. So we got through that self-assessment swimmingly. So very good. Good questions bring clarity. So this is just kind of like a wrap up, of session number 1. So what do you mean by that? Forces the other person to make sense of his own objections. And kind of an example that's given here is when someone says that the Bible was only written by men, and you can ask, do you mean man is incapable of writing something true without error? Right? Because that's essentially what they're asserting there, is that since it was written by men, it must therefore be problematic or erroneous. And so you can ask, well, is it impossible for a man to write true thing? If I write, I am Michael Eppel and I live in Lidditz, is that de facto a false statement just because I'm a man? And obviously it's absurd. So they can kind of see that that they have to rethink their assertion right there. At other times, it serves merely to clarify an issue, which is all that's needed to nullify the objection. So when someone says, don't force your morality upon me, does she mean that you don't have a right to speak your opinion, right? And a lot of times this comes up when maybe someone says something that honestly disagrees with your, version of morality. They say something like, I'm thinking of leaving my wife, right? I'm committing adultery or something like that. And you ask them, hey, are you sure you want to do this? You might question it, try to guide them to maybe not damaging their family or whatever. And then they might respond, hey, don't force your morality upon me. I don't think like that. Right? And wait. When you said that you were going to leave your wife, were you not just imposing your morality upon me, saying this is okay? So you can kind of go in that direction and saying that knife cuts both ways, my friend. And really what the problem that you have here is that I've spoken my opinion. You spoke your opinion first. And so it's just because I have an opinion that's different from yours doesn't mean I'm forcing my morality upon you. Me forcing my morality upon you is me putting you in jail because you disagree with me, right? So, that's, you just want to get some clarity on what do you mean by forcing? Okay. And then finally, this last one. So this one comes up. So I figured this is just kind of an example in the book, but in our culture, this is something that you'll see occasionally, and it's just a complete misrepresentation of what it says in our First Amendment. So I figured it would be helpful for us to kind of go through this one a little bit using our Columbo number 1 question. So separation of church and state. So if someone says that Christians should stay out of politics because of the wall of separation of church and state, let's use Columbo number 1 a little bit. So first of all, does anyone know kind of what that's referring to, separation of church and state? Well, I might have some Constitution buffs in here that probably know a lot more about this than I do. Anyone know?
Means the government can't tell you where you need to go to church.
Basic, yeah. That I think that's one way of putting it, right? Yeah.
Part of protecting churches, and it wasn't that a religious person couldn't be in the government, it was that the government couldn't be in religion.
Yes, that was the intention.
But now people are like, well, now you can't bring this
Coming out
in.
of how Henry changed the church law so he could get divorced.
Oh man, see, this is where the history buffs are coming in that I don't know much about. So what?
In the 1500s in England, King Henry changed the law so he could get divorced. So
Right.
nobody wanted to.
Right.
And they wanted the government to stay out of church matters.
Out of church matters. Interesting. Which I guess that would have been, because that would have been before, obviously, our Constitution was written by a number of years. Because I think a lot of, if I'm not mistaken, I think a lot of the reason why we wrote that into our Constitution was actually a response to England. Because England had somewhat of a church state, the Anglican Church. And they were kind of imposing that version of Christianity upon their citizens. Which I didn't know this King Henry thing, so I'm like, the irony of that's pretty strong.
I found out actually on Instagram last week that in Germany, if you belong to a church in Germany, part of your income is taxed, and the taxes of your income go to the church that you belong.
Really?
What a negative incentive.
That is, yes. I mean, that's how you get a state church.
That to me is like marking that out completely.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, it shows you the difference.
And that doesn't count as their tithe either. They're understood that
Really?
that tax goes to that particular church that they go to.
on top of that. Oh.
I mean, really, that's not voluntary, so I guess I understand that too, but.
Yeah.
It was a.
Well, it shows you how if the state now wants to do things, because honestly, you see churches in the United States because of that 501(c)(3) this non-taxable status being influenced by that. And well, I don't want to say anything that's going to get me in trouble with the government because I don't want to lose my tax-free status, right? Which you can imagine how much stronger that incentive would be if they're actually getting money from the government. Yeah, that's not good. So, okay. So really, what's going on here with this wall of separation? This is not written into our Constitution as written. It never says there's a wall of separation of church and state in our Constitution. There's a non-establishment clause, which, like Katie was saying, the intention of that is to keep the states from imposing a religion upon the citizenry. So, for example, Pennsylvania can't say, we are now a Christian state, and you have to believe in Jesus or we're going to put you in jail, right? Something like that. You can't do that. But that doesn't mean that Christians are not allowed to get involved in politics. That, in fact, that goes against another clause in the First Amendment, which is the Free Exercise Clause, which tells you that you can freely express your religious convictions at any level of society, whether you're a private citizen or you're involved in government, right? As long as it's not going against, it's infringing upon people's freedom of worship, right? That's where it gets dicey. And so you can kind of ask questions about that. Are you saying that Christians should have no vote, right? Which is obviously false. I mean, everyone has a right to vote in the United States as long as you're a citizen. Or that you should have no voice, right? Which obviously goes against our First Amendment. We all have freedom of speech to say our religious convictions. And so you're trying to say that, well, with Christian politicians aren't allowed to say what their religious convictions are, but pretty much everyone else is okay, which obviously doesn't make sense. You could ask, do you mean that only opinions motivated by atheism are legitimate? Which I think this is kind of showing the falsity of defining formal religions as opposed to other worldviews, right? So, because everything that's legislated in the government comes from some sort of worldview. When someone tries to advance a pro-choice, cause, right, and saying that it's okay to, kill 7-week-old infants or whatever, that's coming from a worldview. That's coming from a worldview that says that's okay, right? As same thing with a lot of the Christian worldview, which says that that's not okay. So everything's motivated by a philosophy of some sort, whether it's defined as a religion or not. And so basically, what this second question is saying is do you mean that only opinions motivated by the atheist, philosophy are legitimate as opposed to Christian philosophy? And so it kind of shows that there's a contradiction going on there. And then that last one is, how does having a religion-based conviction automatically disqualify a person's right to speak? Which, obviously, it does not. We have a First Amendment, and that really one of the big functions of that First Amendment is to protect that freedom of, religious thought and being able to express your own religious convictions. Kind of like a way to wrap that up, too, is just to kind of get all that into one question. You can say, it seems that in our, democratic system, everyone is entitled to his opinion and opportunity to vote regardless of their religious conviction. Do you disagree? Right? Does that kind of make sense? Right? So, and I think if they do disagree with that, there's probably some bigger problems there that you have to, weed out. Any questions on that, or comments, or whatever? Feeling pretty good? Okay. And that wraps it up for session number 1. So we're finally getting to move on to session number 2. So let me just bring that up. Tactics 2, and let's go here, play from the start. Okay, so tactics week number 2. So we're going to refine the Columbo tactic down, and hopefully we have time to get to our second question. We're not going to do that because we pretty much did review already. We already kind of got through that too. All right, so second step is we're going to reverse the burden of proof, right? So the first step was gathering information from our challenger, right, which is important so that we know what their view is, so we know what we're kind of up against. And so what I'm going to have you do is just briefly, we're going to kind of go through these questions and just kind of see what your response is to them, immediately. How does this make you feel? So the first one is, the only explanation for how we got here is evolution. Belief in creation is all based on faith in the Bible, not reason. Second one is, a fetus doesn't have self-awareness, so it's not a person. Believing a blob of cells is more important than real people is a silly religious idea with no proof. The last one is, the Gospels are a bunch of stories created by Christians to get other people to join their religion. It's all blind faith in old Bible stories. How does this make you feel when people, if someone was to drive this at you point blank, what are you feeling at this point? Kate. And you can pick any one of them.
What?
You can pick any one of them. Like,
Blindsided by pretty much all of them.
blindsided, yeah. Would you like what would your first instinct be?
Well, I probably with the fetus one, I'm just like, got kids. I'm like, you can see it on the ultrasound from like 10 weeks on. I'm like, how can you not? Yeah, I'm like, when you see that, how can you not believe that it's not a person?
Yeah. That's actually appealing to, like, it's an emotional argument too, which is strong, So that's good. It's one that I don't think gets used enough. So that's good. Kennedy's. What's your initial reaction to? You can pick any one of these questions.
I would say
Challenges.
all of it feels kind of like being attacked. Like, why are you coming at me with this?
Right. Okay.
Maybe we had a conversation before, but like, well, the first one, the only explanation you get here is evolution. If you believe anything else, you're done.
Right.
That's what it says.
That's the subtext of that, isn't it? Yeah.
Explain that a little bit, and there's a lot of actual, real scientific evidence of that not being the case.
Right. You can start to introduce that idea too. Yeah. Cool. Very good.
I think I feel a little concerned that this person is so single-minded that like this is it. It's the only thing it's gonna be. And I wonder to myself, like, often when people are like, well, "This is just the way it is," are hard to talk to people.
They can be, right? Yeah, because they're not. You're kind of getting the sense that they're not really going to be open to what you're going to say.
How am I going to have this conversation in a way that they're going to hear me? Because those sentences say, my mind is already closed.
Right.
Like, these are the kind of people I think that asking questions is hard to.
Yeah.
Like, because you got to get, I don't want to say the right question, because there's more than one right answer, but like, questions I think have to be very carefully worded and
This person isn't really open for discussion.
they don't want
It
discussion.
doesn't seem like
It doesn't seem like it, right? What could happen?
And this is the kind of person you're gonna have to talk to like 24 times.
Yeah. They're going to be they're not a 7-year. They might be a 14-year.
I'm just saying, this person's gonna take a little while.
Right.
And I have a question. These statements coming from other folks, is this what they're starting with?
Hopefully not, but it does. I mean,
Are we having a little bit of, ramp up conversation before we get to this, or is this the opening salvo?
that would be pretty tough, wouldn't it? If someone just came up to you like on the street and just and said something like this. Where you'll see some of this is like Katie can attest to it, like Twitter or like online. Yeah.
Which is why I hate social media so much, because the vast majority of people would not just come up to you and start by saying
Badgering
one of
you.
those things, but they do
Online.
Real life
Yeah.
people don't have conversations this way.
Yeah.
Internet people do.
Internet
They do.
people
Yes. And not to say that, like you were saying, I think it could ramp, in a real conversation, it could ramp up to something like this. And hopefully you've earned their level of trust to some degree, hopefully, maybe, but some background.
You need some sort of like, I feel like before you say, what do you mean by that? I feel like, where is this coming from?
Yeah.
Like,
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
yeah.
What's our beef?
Are you okay?
Yeah. There you go. Oh, very good.
Let's go get lunch. Let's get you something to eat.
That's a Christian response right there. I like that. Right. Therapeutic use of self. All right. So what do you guys think the burden of proof means?
Who's responsible to defend their position?
Wow, that is exactly how it's written. Did you read Tactics? It's like written in the book, almost exactly like that. So yeah. Now, who shoulders the burden of proof in conversations?
The person making the claim.
There we go. The responsibility someone has to defend his view. Has one rule: whoever makes the claim bears the burden. And so, really, what this is kind of the bottom line for this is that there's no more free. catching up on my own words. No more free rides for the non-believer, right? So, because this Christians all too often bear the full burden of proof. People start to just attack them with statements like this, and they don't know what to say, and so they just try to defend themselves, like, kind of how Ryan was saying, like, oh, there's a lot of science to show that evolution is kind of questionable. You can, like Kate was saying, you can start to argue against the, pro-choice and kind of show there's some logical fallacies going on there too. No one really took the bottom one, but same thing with saying that there are a bunch of stories, right? That the gospel is just a bunch of stories, and that there is no evidence for that. Well, there actually is evidence for that. There's plenty of evidence for the pro-life cause, and there's more than enough evidence as well to show that evolution is not necessarily a scientific fact. But before we jump into that, they're the ones that made the claim. So they should have to give us some evidence, right? And so we want to, before we kind of go in with all of our, facts, we want to have them tell us their facts first, right? Especially since they're the ones that made the claim first. So we want to steer the burden of proof back onto their shoulders and make them give reasons, not just their point of view. Because honestly, a lot of times, all they're giving us is just their point of view, which is that's what we did too. So, but we want to give them, we want evidence. Right, so stories need evidence. So let's see, we got time. What I like about this class is sometimes we get to have story time. So relax, everybody. I'm gonna pull up a story from Tactics, and this is on page 34. So, anyone have any comments before we get into story time?
Only that on Netflix right now, on my Netflix, there's like an ad to watch something about the Big Bang.
Oh, is there?
Yeah, there is.
Josh was talking about a couple weeks ago?
I don't know. I think it's like National Geographic or something.
I think Josh was talking about that. You're Josh.
Probably. There was something.
He's into that stuff. Yeah.
Josh and Fever had good things to say about that.
Yeah.
About that program. Okay.
No, I thought Big Bang, and I thought of like Sheldon.
Oh, they're right. That Big Bang. All right, so here we go. So this is kind of showing the burden of proof rule kind of in action, of kind of trying to steer it back onto the other person. And so this is a conversation that the author Greg Kokel had with a guy on the radio. So he said the following dialogue occurred on a secular talk radio station in Los Angeles when a caller disagreed with my point that the Big Bang Theory provided evidence for God, not against him. I argued that simply put, a Big Bang needs a Big Banger. Right, which is I thought that was pretty clever. So the caller says, well, I don't think it does, because you could start with a base of nothing, and you could say that there was nothing but an infinite continuous moment until eventually one very insignificant thing happened. A point happened in the nothingness. And then that point expanded, which is an extremely simple process. It requires no intelligence, so no intelligent God had to intervene. All we needed was a tiny imperfection in the perfect nothingness. And that imperfection could then expand and become variegated and increasingly complex, and soon you would have galaxies and planets. And so Greg says, I understand the story, and I like the way you started. You could say that. Well, that's just what you've done. You just said it. You just told a story. It's one thing to say it, it's another thing to demonstrate it's reasonable giving the evidence. That evidence shows that the universe had a beginning. Now we have to explain how that beginning came to be. You can't explain it by natural law because that was the beginning of natural law. And so then Greg says to the host, he says, this is a good call because it illustrates something. The tendency of people who don't like a point of view to tell a story to explain it away. But it's just a fairy tale to say once upon a time there was nothing and then something came out of nothing. It may be very easy for him to believe, but a story is not evidence. Right? So that kind of, I think, illustrates kind of this steering of the burden of proof back onto that guy, because he gave no proof, right? He said this very elaborate story of how you could have, nothing, and then, a very simple thing happened. You just had a slight imperfection in the nothingness, and then all it has to do is expand and expand and expand until you get planets and galaxies and whatever. But is that real? Does that ever happen? Can you have nothing that turns into something? I mean, and the experiment that I do, and I forget where I heard this the first time, but everyone just shut their eyes for a second and just pretend. I know we all probably have little fuzzies going around in our eyes, so we all there might be spots of redness, but just pretend you're looking at an ocean of nothingness. There is nothing at all anywhere. At what point does something come into existence? All right, you can all open your eyes. When does that happen?
When you think of something comes in.
Well, your mind doesn't even exist. There is nothing. I mean, perfect nothingness.
I can't do that.
Creator.
You can't.
I can't do that.
You can't imagine it.
Imagine nothing.
I can't really either. But I guess in principle, if there was nothing, zero things, absolutely nothing, can something come into that?
Well, it depends what your definition of nothing is.
All right, he's using Columbo number 1. Yes, I guess that's true. So, yeah, if we're defining nothing as literally no material matter, no spirit, no nothing, no God, no
Complete emptiness.
complete emptiness, literally. It's actually a law of logic. Nothing can happen.
There's no imperfection that could show up if there was.
Exactly. If there's nothing there, something does. You're right. There's a law called the law of causality. There's two laws, actually. So there's the law of non-contradiction and the law of causality. And they both require there to be something if something comes into existence, right? You can't get something from nothing. So to kind of put it this way, the way that the law of causality is worded is every effect requires a cause, an antecedent cause, right? So an effect is simply defined that way too. It's just something that has a cause that comes before it. And the reason that this works is because it would be contradictory to say that you can have something self-create itself, right? Because in order for that to happen, it would have to exist before it existed. That doesn't make any sense at all, right? To say that you exist before you existed, right? So something had to exist before it came into existence, and so to say that it came out of nothing is an absurd. It's just a nonsense statement, right? There's really nothing there. Little heady and philosophical. Does everyone kind of think they might understand what that's driving at? So yeah, I think the main point that Greg is really trying to before getting all technical, really what he's trying to look to kind of hammer home is that a story needs evidence, right? You can't just tell a story. You have to actually provide some sort of evidence for that. And it was the other guy, it was that caller's job to defend his view, which he didn't do. He just left it flat at a story, right? So how much time we got?
I think it's tricky sometimes when you're on, this is what I was thinking, in your middle of a conversation like this, we have to be very conscious about training our brains that stories aren't evidence. Because stories play on so many emotional levels that it can really skew your way of seeing the truth.
Yeah, it's very easy for them to manipulate your emotions into thinking that there's...
Stories are tricky.
Yeah, and so you do have to kind of pause and reflect for a second, like, did they actually give any rationale for why that's true?
We gotta train our brains to do that.
That's what we're doing here.
Yeah,
That's
but that's what I'm saying, that is a conscious effort that has to be
yeah,
made.
right. And that's why we're taking this so slow too, because I mean we still haven't gotten to Columbo number 2 yet, and I don't think we're going to have time to today. But it's just, and what I want you to do is just, we've spent these past 3 classes really just kind of getting, number 1 in our head, right? Which is just, what do you mean by that? And if that's all you ask for the next 5 weeks, great. You learn Columbo number 1, and that's really an extremely profound step to take. And then what we're going to do is we're going to stew on Columbo number 2 for a while, which I guess I'll let the cat out of the bag. It's how'd you come to that conclusion? So the first one's kind of it's the what, right? What do you mean? The second one is why do you believe that, right? So you want to know the what and the why before you even try to make a case, right? So, and we're going to spend time on both of those, and because they really are the fundamental building blocks, and hopefully it becomes a little bit more natural as this course progresses. We're probably going to be doing this until like May, so we're going to have some serious time to really kind of think about this and practice it in a safe environment, right? With our friends and family members. So that's why we're doing this. And yeah, I guess I can probably do the next one. This is basically just a restatement of what I already said. So it's not enough for someone to reject your view by offering an alternative view. We have to take it a step further by showing why their view is more reasonable. When we make claims, and that's the thing too. So if we make a claim too, we're not looking to be the only ones driving the questions. Occasionally we're going to want to defend our view too. And so we're just, whoever makes the statement bears the burden of proof, right? So we're not looking to be unfair in any of this. But we just want to make sure that they're not being unfair towards us. It's 9:55. Okay, last thing. So exceptions to the rule. So some beliefs are what we would call properly basic beliefs. And so, let's just kind of think about this for a moment because this can get really heady. So properly basic beliefs are grounded in reasonable assumptions about reality. So there's certain things that we do not have to give evidence for, right? Something that I don't have to give evidence for is my own existence, right? So we are going to assume, for the sake of our ability to converse with each other, that I do in fact exist, right? Otherwise, we can't really have a conversation. Likewise, we have to assume that your senses are reliable. So not only do I exist, but your senses are reliable in what they're communicating to you about me, right? So your senses are telling you that there's this guy up here wearing a pink polka dotted tie that's, disseminating information on, the properly basic beliefs. Now, there's not some intervening, force that's like capturing my words and telling you something completely different than what I'm actually telling you, or that we're actually in a dark room, we're not really in a lit room, right? That your senses are actually accurately representing, the outside world to you, right? The exception to this would be if there's a reason to believe that that's not true, right? If you have schizophrenia, we cannot assume that to be true, right? Because you might have hallucinations, right? So, but generally speaking, unless you're able to prove to the otherwise, you're able to prove to the contrary, your senses are reliable, right? We could not actually have science if our senses were not reliable, because every time you observe the outside world and make judgments on it, you're assuming that your senses are telling you something accurate. Like, when they look to the sky and they say, well, that star is like however many billions of light years away. Well, in order to even come to that conclusion, you have to assume that your eye is giving you, a correct representation of of what that star actually looks like, right? So we have to assume, we do not have to prove certain things, unless we want to get real philosophical, like philosophers do this, right? They'll go on about ontology, like the existence of, your own being, and whether or not you can actually know that you exist, right? But we can leave that to the philosophers. When we're having, conversations here about other things, we do not have to prove our own existence or that our senses are in fact reliable. So, and I think that's where we're going to end it today, because that way you can go and pick up your kids and we don't have to be late for worship. So, thanks for coming to Tactics for another day, and I hope to see you guys next week.